Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at the solar eclipse in Aries that is taking place on March 29th of this year. So this is going to be a partial solar eclipse that will only really be visible up in the polar northeast of North America. So very few people will actually see the eclipse itself, but it will be impacting us quite a bit, and it has some very interesting dynamics to it. So I wanted to go through this with everyone. As always, before we dive into it, we are still running the Chart Your Destiny giveaway. So if you would like to be entered to receive a free personal reading with me, all you have to do is make sure that you're subscribed, give the video a like, and then comment down below with your location or your home. And as always, Earth is plenty specific enough if you don't want to go any more specific than that. There's also information in the description box if you would like to learn more about memberships and extra content and perks and things like this. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it. So as we can see, the solar eclipse is taking place at 9 degrees exactly of Aries, which is a bit of a trip. And we have here both of these ruled by Mars, and Mars is in Cancer. It's just now wrapping up a major retrograde phase that it's gone through in recent months, which has been a bit of a challenge, especially in terms of our action and our emotion and putting those things in their right places and making sure that those things are aligned. So this has been, to some extent in recent months, a bit frustrating for us to deal with, but it's getting this kind of release point in this new moon eclipse. And in addition to Mars ruling the solar eclipse here, we also have the moon part of the solar eclipse ruling that Mars, which is to say that the moon and Mars are in mutual reception. So they're speaking directly to each other, and they're helping each other out a bit with the fact that they are in unfamiliar territory. So they're both hosting each other, and by doing so, especially for that Mars, this phase of Mars in what we consider to be its fall in Cancer, where this action-oriented part of our lives and ourselves that we project forward from our ego of, this is me, and this is what I want, and this is what I'm going to go after, being in this very watery realm of Cancer and not quite knowing exactly when to project that, possibly even projecting some fears and things like this, and then trying to act from that place. Having the moon in Aries helps that Mars out a lot with this last bit that it has to go through of Cancer before it can finally move on for real from this big retrograde that we've been experiencing recently. So some of those dense energies that we've been needing to wade through in some highly specific ways, it's going to feel loosened up a bit. We're still dealing with a lot of water and earth, which is to say we're still dealing with some muddy energies here, but this helps at least a little bit with that of being able to compartmentalize and isolate that part of us which would like to act assertively from a place of confidence and assuredness. And there's really two different things that I see going on with this solar eclipse that we're likely to feel is very distinctive of this period of time, but are also quite distinct from each other. So for one thing, we have this solar eclipse relatively isolated by aspect. So we have a waning sextile from Pluto. That's already passed. It's not really significant. We could also say that we have a semi-square between the solar eclipse and this Uranus, which is very active right now. But for one thing, that is a minor aspect. And for another, all it's really going to do is agitate us a bit if we don't feel like we're free to act as we desire, that we don't feel like we're free to express ourselves authentically, or even to take some time and reflect on who it is that we feel like we authentically are. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in a moment here. But ultimately, what we have is this major minor grand trine that I've been talking about a bit recently, where we have Mars in a trine to Saturn, the North Node, Venus, and Neptune. And then we have both sides of that in sextiles to Uranus here. And this can be pretty explosive. Now, it can also be interestingly productive to shake us out of a routine or to shake us out of a pattern that we have set for ourselves that we're kind of just going through the motions with regard to at this point. And this is going to play out, in my view, very differently on a personal level from on a global level. So I think this is actually pretty neat and cool for us as an experience that we're going through on a personal level, because it's relatively emancipatory around the actions we feel we need to take, the things that we feel we need to like, the ways in which we feel we need to think and imagine things and communicate and express about things. And then also when it comes to the direction that things are going. These things are not really set in stone right now. And I think that the solar eclipse is really pointing that out to us that, hey, we can take a big step back and think this through and find those areas of our life where we feel really stuck and find a little bit of leeway, a little bit of maneuvering room within those structures. On a political level, we'll talk about that in a moment. It's going to be a whole different can of worms that we're dealing with. We also need to keep in mind that Mercury and Venus are both retrograde right now, so there are some pretty significant aspects of ourselves and our personalities which are being called back. They're kind of being recalled from, say, the outer world to go within to look at things a bit differently than we usually have. And this, I think, is where a lot of that autopilot action that we probably have been taking is going to come under question. But we'll also get into that in a moment as well. We just went through this Mars, Saturn, Uranus to an extent, but Mars is, of course, action. It is assertiveness. It's how we project ourselves out into the world and also how the structures of the world do that. Saturn is where we are very responsible. It's how we create structures within our life. It's how we plan things out. It's that long view. It's that basis from which we perceive of our future plans and how those are going to play out in a very practical and mundane way. These are what we call the malefic planets. They tend to act in more complicated ways than, say, a lot of the other planets do. They can even stir up some trouble. And so the fact that we have those in agreement with each other, and then because these blue lines basically indicate support or agreement or alignment, and notice we have no red lines. That's also very significant for us. But these two are in agreement, and they're also in agreement and supported by Uranus here. And Uranus is really the apex of a lot of what's going on. So that indicates that we're in a period of profound change to the structures from which we act, the plans into which we channel our energy, our effort, our stamina. But like I alluded to, we shouldn't just see this as that this area of our lives personally and collectively are undergoing a great deal of change and even potential liberation, but we should see it as an opportunity to create that change and to create that sense of freedom for ourselves within these structures and within our action within that. Now, we also have a ton of placements that are pretty significant. We have Venus and Mercury at 28 degrees and 0 degrees here, and we have Neptune right at 29 degrees, just a few minutes from changing signs into Aries. And right here is a fixed star known as Shiat, or, and I'm going to try not to butcher this, Assad. And this star indicates some complications, some difficulty in specific ways. Again, especially I think this is going to be experienced in terms of mundane events out in the world, but it also indicates an area of pretty strongly charged karma and acting with integrity through challenge, the rewards that we get from that, and the fact that we tend to face a greater difficulty when we're not acting in integrity. So we'll go into that as well. And then, yeah, we have Neptune going into Aries the very next day after this eclipse, which is a very big deal. It hasn't been here for a century and a half in Aries. And this is really ushering in a whole new era of the collective consciousness, of culture, of our beliefs and values, what we glorify, what we demonize, things like this. So we definitely need to look at this eclipse within the context of everything else that's going on around it, which is a whole lot of action around this point of 0 Aries and across this cusp around this period of time. And ultimately what this is going to result in is that in next February, we're going to have the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune right at the 0 Aries point. So everything that's going on pretty much from this March until next February is of extraordinary karmic and collective human developmental consequence and significance going forward for our future for decades or centuries to come. And so it's a highly charged, broader period of time, which is getting triggered by this eclipse as well, which is right at 9 of Aries. And it is, of course, very close to the 0 Aries point too, while we have simultaneously all of this traipsing across this boundary here. Because as we'll go into in a moment, additionally, right during this day, we're going to have Mercury make that leap into Pisces. Mercury and Neptune conjoin at 29 degrees and 59 minutes of Pisces, the exact last minute of that sign, the exact last minute of the zodiac, and then Neptune pops into Aries. So it's a weird and fascinating series of events that are unfolding in concentration right now, and then we're seeing a lot more of that unfold throughout the coming year. So I definitely wanted to point that out. So let's go ahead and look at this more along the lines of a personal level, and then we'll look at it in terms of mundane astrology, and then we'll go through all of the signs and look at where this eclipse is taking place in our charts personally. So yeah, here we have with the solar eclipse, the sun shining, the moon coming through and blocking some of that sun. And the sun is our ego, it is our sense of being in the world. It's who we feel that we are. It's our identity. And with the moon coming through and casting a bit of a shadow from the light that usually casts onto the earth, it's calling it into question. It's calling it to reflect upon itself a bit before it shines out into the world. And so in and of itself, it is a relatively introspective moment, a moment of reflection, a moment of stepping back and reconsidering what it is that we do every single day, the impact that we have in the world every single day, the way that we experience ourselves, our identity, our ego on a day-to-day basis. It's calling that into question and asking us to look at this somewhat differently. And then in addition to that indication of reflection, we also have Mercury in retrograde, which calls us to introspect our thought process, introspect our expression really toward ourselves, to rethink and reconsider our own views on things, our own opinions on matters, the way that we conceive of things, especially in close conjunction with Neptune. This can go even very broad of reconceiving of our worldview and our philosophy, how it is that we exchange with each other and what it is that we receive from others and also that we offer up to others. Venus is also retrograde. And so while Mercury is calling us to look inward rather than necessarily looking outward, Venus is also asking us to reevaluate, to look at what it is that we really like or that we feel is something that we connect with, that we value, that we consider pleasing. And again, ask ourselves if we really feel like that resonates with us anymore. So we have all of this going on very, very close to each other right here, very much under the influence of Neptune, which is also rather introspective. It calls us into, again, the collective conscious. There's probably a lot that is basically going around in the ether that we're all picking up on from ourselves, from whatever spiritual entities we feel are participating in that, from other people. And it's all creating a very potent soup within which we are experiencing life, and kind of picking up on the different ingredients there, and maybe even picking up on some that we wouldn't necessarily have considered to be there or to be useful, or that we haven't really connected with quite yet. And these may be things that other people are putting out there, but it may even be things that we already do on some level connect to, but brush over and sweep aside and kind of ignore, due to the fact that this may be a bit inconvenient to us on a practical or mundane level. But it's really being called into question here. So I feel like the best thing that we can do with this is to go with that and to kind of think that through. So yeah, identifying these autopilot patterns where we're not really thinking things through, we're just doing things the way that we always do them because it quote unquote works, but it may be caging us in a way that is starting to feel very uncomfortable and that we're needing to break out of. So reflecting on aspects of life that have been running on autopilot without conscious thought or intention, and then reprioritizing and evaluating from that, taking that moment of rest, of the sun's light being dimmed from the earth, to reassess and realign priorities. And again, coming back to what truly matters, and also not just what matters, but what's relevant, what's actually relevant. There's probably a lot of stuff that we engage in and that we think is somehow important that is really losing relevance. And I think that that's going to become crystal clear by next February, when we have the exact conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, kind of crumbling some of our assumptions, some of our narratives about the world, and what's relevant, what matters, what structures are good, what structures are bad, and things like this. So this is our first major deep consideration that we can do along these lines in our personal lives. And we'll probably be confronted in the world with some of these themes also coming up and pushing people to kind of reconsider these things. And of course, you don't have to rest exactly at the moment of the eclipse. If you are busy or something, that is totally fine. These eclipses tend to hold at least for a few weeks. Some say up to 6 months. I mean, their impact in the world tends to be for several months. Exploring inner desires and preferences. So again, asking yourself what you genuinely think, like, value, and outside of the context of these external influences. That's what I think is really interesting about the fact that this sun and moon are acting pretty independently. This eclipse is not really tied into the rest of the chart. It's just kind of happening without a bunch of other planets interfering with it, and without them really looking at it. So I think that a lot of us are going to be going through moments that we might not even share so much with others, where we're looking at all of these matters for ourselves and then reprioritizing along those lines, rather than continuing to prioritize based on what we've already been doing or based on what other people think or like or value. Also, with a new moon eclipse, there's this kind of shadow that, of course, is cast. And this can point to areas of ourselves that we tend to ignore or suppress due to our practical lives, due to some fear or discomfort with that. And so that can also really be brought to the surface. I wouldn't stress about that. I would definitely recommend embracing that. And when you have a moment, just taking some time out to try and identify the different pieces of that without fear. Also, with the sun and moon in Aries conjoined together, with the sun blocked by that moon, with Mars also speaking quite directly to these kinds of feelings that we have coming up of instincts, Aries and Cancer are both very instinctive signs. And so listening, paying attention to your dreams, to your instincts, to your intuition, paying attention to what's kind of going on inside and how you are internally reacting to different things, and not, again, just sweeping that aside out of convenience. A lot of us are going to be reevaluating our perspectives, even our worldview, looking at things from different angles, looking at different aspects of ourselves from different angles. Are we expressing ourselves authentically? Are we conceiving of matters and the world in an authentic way? Or are we just taking in what we are being fed and then kind of regurgitating that back out in this collective, perhaps even performative pseudo alignment with the way that things are and what the old structures tell us that we are in the world? And regardless of whether we are really satisfied with that, constantly putting that on the back burner, looking at that from a different angle, understanding that a lot of what has been telling us that, again, like I said, is going to be revealed in this coming year to be quite irrelevant and is going to have a lot of the cracks and faults in that system, in that structure, to be revealed anyway. So definitely challenge your own assumptions big time and do seek that clarity of instinct, not reaction, but instinct. It could even be really helpful to actively seek to look at what it is that you tend to avoid. So I try and do this from time to time, where if I'm feeling a certain way, I'll just take some time out and be like, what is it that I am trying not to look at right now? What is it that I am actively pushing aside or not addressing or whatnot? So those distractions, those doubts, that confusion that comes in when we are dealing with something that we are really subconsciously avoiding, that we don't really want to look at, again, out of a sense of convenience, intentionally seeking out an understanding of what that is and then addressing it, because Uranus is not really going to allow that to happen. None of this really is, but especially Uranus right at this apex point, it is going to call so much into question. And if we're not trying to actively kind of look at that and seek that out and change that for ourselves in a way that is sustainable for us personally and for us with regard to, say, our own community, our own sense of connection, Uranus will do that for us, and then it will be much more outside of our control. And I think that as humans, we do like to try to keep as much of what's going on in our lives in our conscious awareness and under some form of our direction. So just a bit of a recommendation there. So the solar eclipse is going to point pretty directly to areas of our life that are under transformation. Of course, we'll want to keep in mind where a lot of this other stuff is hitting us up in our own personal charts. But this solar eclipse is without a doubt acting as an omen for the release of all of this here. So the eclipse is pointing to opportunities to make those changes. And again, that don't rely on the past way that we've done things. Oh, well, I've done this, so whatever, I'm just going to continue because it's easy. Or input from others. Again, this is unaspected. This is the unaspected kind of area of our lives where we're able to experience some change and push for some change even that is not dependent on the past. It's not dependent upon others. It's self-sufficient. It is individuated for us personally in Aries there. So we may feel this as an upsurge or an upwelling of inspiration in this area of our life too, depending on where this plays out in our chart, to express ourselves authentically and, again, independently as a unique individual. And we'll likely be presented with some new ideas and areas to focus on that will be a point of awareness of a need for a sense of liberty within ourselves, upon which we can then structure, with Saturn then moving into Aries very shortly here, the new narratives with Neptune shortly moving into Aries here around our thought processes, our values, what we like, what we align with, what it is that we want for ourselves. So out in the world, what can we expect? Some of this is going to be a little bit unnerving maybe, but I wouldn't stress about it too much. I mean, we had a solar eclipse in Aries last April, and it was loud, and it did a lot of stuff in the world, and it definitely impacted some people, but it also pushed a lot of people to just kind of, again, reevaluate things of their own accord. And so I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that for the most part on the personal level from what this is causing out in the world. So unexpected shifts or new trends, new means and structures in which to channel energy and effort. And so we can see this Uranus again, working on the energy, working on the structure, and trying to bring that into a place of greater flexibility that is likely to challenge conventional wisdom and the established way of doing things, but it's in order to free us up, in order to make things more sustainable. So we'll probably see some people putting forth, and probably a lot of other people, possibly even us, resonating with ideas that are being put forth that are out of the ordinary, that are challenging some of the structures that we've been dependent upon and have been dependent upon us agreeing with them in the past. So this is definitely going to fly in the face of a lot of that. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to watch unfold. We could also have some interesting tech announcements. The last time that we had an eclipse in this sorrow cycle that we're dealing with right now, which is the recurrence of eclipses in a specific area of the sky, we did have the iPhone release date announced and like a whole big excitement and anticipation around that. But again, we also have this Uranus at the apex of this big minor grand trine. So that also would indicate to me something about a probably a physical format because it's in Taurus, but we'll see. Or like ways of connecting or community or something like that, that is representative of basically a new technology. Also with eclipses, generally speaking, but when I looked back at this sorrow cycle, for sure with this one, major geopolitical and economic shifts tend to take place around these seasons, these eclipse seasons, especially around the solar eclipses. So this is marking the beginning of an era. And what I find fascinating about this is, and I don't think that I've mentioned this yet, this is our last Aries eclipse. So we're actually rounding out a cycle that started in 2023 and has been chipped away at and has been exposed to an extent since then. And this one, when I look at it, it looks like it's launching us into a new direction here, having rounded out what it's already dealt with and what it's already chipped away at. We can then see those cracks, work from the understanding that that whole thing is about to give way, and we need to look at new ways of doing things that genuinely align with us. So this is the beginning of a new era with this eclipse, which is likely to see a background story and narrative wind up collapsing and old systems giving way to new realities and new ideas with the, again, upcoming Saturn-Neptune conjunction that is playing into this eclipse too. Now, I am worried about this. I've been worried about nuclear stuff every time that I've been looking at this minor grand trine between specifically Mars, Saturn, and Uranus, because Uranus is at the apex point. It speaks to structures and authority and so on. And then Mars can be war-related matters, but also pretty explosive too. And when Uranus and Mars get together, it tends to go in that way. So it's just been in the back of my mind this whole time. I'm not entirely sure that like it's going to turn out that way, but I do get a bit of a tinge of yuck when I think of this in that context of that being something that exists in the world, and that being something that this could act upon. It would do so in a not great way. Also tied into the sorrow cycle is increased tensions between what we consider like East and West. I feel like we can see some of that rising up now in a new way. And I'm a little worried that this is going to represent a trigger along those lines. So we could see not even necessarily specifically attacks on specific people, but in general, we could also see some standoffs where things feel like they're at a kind of stalemate point, but that also is likely to break down in one direction or another with Uranus here. And then unpredictable geopolitical events. Again, like that structure that standoff basically consists of being on shaky ground and being very likely to shift hard in one direction or another. And yeah, in terms of markets and economic impacts, when I was looking at this, it does look like some corrections, which, sad to say, when we live in little bubble economy societies, corrections are a little bit like, I don't know if I really want that. But definitely due to instability and a concern, again, around the ground on which a lot of the structures are placed. So it doesn't necessarily indicate everything's going to go completely sideways, and it doesn't necessarily need to indicate a complete upheaval. It could, but I think it's more along the lines of not trusting the ground and therefore just being quite cautious along those lines. And yeah, we could see that also cause an introduction of kind of new paradigms of the economy. But again, even with that, even with something, this is what I'm trying to point out, like even with something that isn't super consequential, there's just a questioning of the foundations and therefore a bit of caution, I think, around that we're going to wind up seeing. So with Mercury retrograde, in and of itself, as we all know, there can be miscommunications, misunderstandings, bad information, so on and so forth, tech issues. But especially when Mercury is about to step right down into the deep of its detriment and its fall, when it is in Pisces, and right into the embrace, so to say, of Neptune, there's not going to be accurate information straight up. Just like, it's just not going to be a correct picture that is being presented. So major confusion and misinformation in media, politics, public discourse, propaganda, unclear messaging, like even propaganda that's completely ineffective because it doesn't really make sense and things like this. Diplomatic misunderstandings, negotiations that are based on idealism rather than practicality, or rather than a real understanding of what a situation is and what it's going to become, whether that be intentional or just a matter of the context and the circumstance in which we're trying to understand things. So I'm going to keep kind of recommending for this period of time here to consider most of your tuning into news media and things like this to basically be a waste of time. And I still totally do it, just kind of instinctively. But I also am very aware of the fact that just because I have the benefit and the privilege of looking at this, that I'm not going to be getting good information anyway. The stories are shifting. The narrative is changing back and forth and back and forth. It's trying to get its footing, but it's not going to for a while anyway. And then once these conjoin, the whole thing is basically going to come under extreme scrutiny as it is. So if you don't want to tune in, don't feel bad for not tuning in. Also, with this Mercury retrograde about to go into Pisces, about to conjoin Neptune, which is also on the cusp of switching into a new sign, reevaluation of information and truth. So there may be a push to uncover information or expose certain matters. And that would probably be welcome. But again, I think I mentioned recently a bit of a risk of like limited hangouts. And that's where you get some of the information about something that you're trying to expose or something that is being half admitted out of a desire for people to stop looking. If you just admit part of maybe something that you did that was bad, then maybe people will stop digging into it. I would be a little bit concerned about those kinds of things popping up in the media right now, rather than the whole and complete truth of any matters. But we're also likely to see some scandals or leaks for sure around this period of time. And that could be around anything messaging. So it could be, or conversations, diplomatic conversations and things like this, media, technology, even entertainment and things like this. We could see some information slip a bit, but again, it's not likely to be the whole story. So miscommunication and loss of trust in public figures and institutions. Saturn's getting really close, and it's about to bring the deception of this Neptune that we've been dealing with for a little while, that it tends to get into unless it is checked pretty well by Saturn. The last time we had that happen was 1989. People are getting pretty skeptical and pretty sick of, I think, a lot of the narratives that we're dealing with right now. So we're likely to see increasing parts of many populations globally releasing that trust, releasing the story that they have maybe been told, or the picture that's been painted for them, and no longer really identifying with that. But yeah, revelations and art, media, entertainment, we kind of talked about that a bit, but we do also need to keep in mind idealization and charismatic leaders, utopian promises. That's one thing that this Neptune is still going to try to basically do, while the structure is kind of closing in as well. These two interact with each other in such an interesting way, because it's not just that Saturn checks Neptune, it's really a two-way street where the whole thing kind of winds up dissolving and coming apart in a way. And so if things look too good to be true, I would say that it's less risky for right now to assume that that is the case, and just keep an open mind and not buy into certain messaging or certain stories that are being told. Also, sadly, with this Saros cycle, I saw that there were a lot of like disasters. So the Exxon Valdez spill, the Virginia Tech issue, and the Hillsborough disaster all took place in the last two of the exact Saros cycles that we are dealing with this time around. So I'm hoping that we don't have another mass event like that, but we'll have to see. So additionally, with this fixed star Shia, that is also associated with natural disasters involving water, maritime accidents or crises, and we're likely to see this issue arising again throughout this whole year. So we could see a spill. We could see issues when it comes to ships or navies or whatnot. And again, there could be something here where there's some collective grief of something that we wind up hearing about and witnessing happening in the world. But what's interesting about this star is that there is a confrontation of karmic lessons. There's a confrontation of perceived tests. And by pushing oneself to confront your fears, to confront limitations that have been placed upon you, that you have been placed upon yourself, that maybe are real, or past issues, past problems that have come from one or another direction. And this doesn't have to be on a personal level. This can be the past mistakes of governance structures or institutions or things like that, and that needing to be confronted and faced. And then there's this cultural aspect of the star as well, where emotional content is then able to be expressed or transmuted into creative works and creative output. So you are a creative type. A lot of what's going on across this star could actually be kind of helpful to that end. And it can also offer a lot of opportunities for growth, for maturation, gaining resilience, spiritual transformation, transcendence, matters like this. So yeah, I think that this eclipse is going to throw us all for a loop. I think that it's a mixed bag. I think on a personal level, it can push us to look at some things that we've been ignoring recently, but would be very helpful and fulfilling for us to dig into again. And then on a collective level, certainly I expect some fallout. Straightforwardly. I can't brush over that. I can't ignore that that is quite likely. But with the energies that we have available here, this is about a major, broad period of time in which we are undergoing a huge amount of institutional and cultural and narrative or ideologically based change. And I think that ultimately this is good. I'm very optimistic about the coming years, and all of this is feeding into that. But first we need to let go of a lot of what has been held on to. And I think that that is a lot of what this solar eclipse that is not really connected into everything else that's going on in the world, but is asking itself questions on its own. And then these very introspective retrogrades of Mercury and Venus, which, by the way, both started right around 9 degrees of Aries. And so this solar eclipse is likely to point to what it is that these retrograde periods of time are calling on us to reconsider and to introspect about, to dig into for our own selves. And then the involvement of Neptune here as well, trying to stretch our imagination, but then not being exactly clear about that. It's a journey, so to say, that we all need to be taking throughout this period of time to set us up as best as we can for all of the coming changes that we're going to be seeing too. So I hope that this was helpful. And now we can get into the sign by sign forecast. So for Aries or Aries rising, this solar eclipse is going to be deeply, deeply personal for you. So it's all of this is really taking place in your first house and your 12th house, the 12th house of your subconscious and your kind of spiritual connection to matters, where it is that you pick up also on that collective unconscious, the matters going on in the ether, which are really enriched right around this time. So you're likely tapping into a lot of that. But for you, it's about filtering all of that information to how does that fit into your sense of self, how it is that you present to the world, how it is that you express yourself, and how you personally show up in your own life. We even have in Uranus and Mars playing into all of this as well, questions around your own personal values and your sense of security and stability that you create for yourself. And then in the 4th house of your roots, your home, your family, going way back, I just think that this is all coming up for a major reevaluation of your values, your goals, and your sense of self, and then looking at and possibly even actively seeking out an understanding of those areas where you feel inhibited or held back or where you doubt yourself, especially. And that all coming up for a major cleansing throughout this period of this eclipse as well. So that, I think, is a lot really of what I have for you, Aries. It's not much more complicated than that, so I won't stretch it out. So let's go on to Taurus here. So for Taurus, this eclipse is taking place in your 12th house of your subconscious, your spirituality, and it's also playing into your 11th house of the friends and allies and groups of people around you that you engage with. And so there's probably questions that you have about where do you fit in. You may kind of doubt your own personal alignment with those around you or wish that you were more connected with people around you throughout this time. And so you're really being asked, how do you want to relate to others? How is it that you want to contribute to a group effort? And do you hold yourself back in any of that? because if you do, you're being asked to really look at that right in its face and see, are you maybe expressing yourself authentically? Do you feel that you are? Is there something about your environment that feels a little bit off or maybe a little bit agitating that feels not aligned with you? So if there is, basically what this solar eclipse is asking you to do is to take some time out by yourself and look through those matters and see where your priorities are, not just what other people want from you or how they want you to contribute, but what genuinely feels right. And if there's not a lot of opportunity that you see available to you to that end, you may very well need to create that opportunity. So possibly even being pushed to create a kind of community group or something along the lines of maybe your field or your friends organizing nights out or whatever, with them, coming together with them more. You may need to push for that eventually, but right now you are being asked to really spend some time with yourself and question your own assumptions around relating with others and whether you feel aligned with the people that are around you. And it would be very productive, I think, to pay attention to any dreams that you have and the little serendipitous things that come up and seem to point you in a certain direction that should be coming through pretty apparently and pretty strongly to you around this period of time. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Taurus rising, for this eclipse. So for Gemini rising, this eclipse is taking place in your 11th house of the groups that you belong to, your friends, how it is that you connect in with group efforts and activities. And then there's some energy that's coming back from that house into your 10th house. So your public standing, your reputation, your legacy. So there's a question that's being posed to you about how you relate to others and whether you feel aligned with or supported by the people that are around you, and whether you feel like you are communicating with them pretty authentically, whether honestly, whether you even like some of the people that you deal with on a regular basis. Is there like a mutual benefit that is being gained from that? Or do you feel that you connect with a lot of people out of a sense of duty or obligation? If that's the case, then you may be asked here, is there a way that you can connect with other kinds of people and other groups that might feel more fulfilling in this period of time? If there's something lacking in these other groups that maybe you've been surrounded by for a while. So you may be really inspired to create a group if that's the case, if you don't feel like you're fully socially satisfied. And doing that with like-minded individuals, doing that in a way where you feel like you can contribute to group goals or group efforts to foster a sense of community around you, especially if you feel like you've been isolated for a while or, again, unsatisfied with your relationships. You may be called upon to initiate something along those lines. Now, with Uranus in the 12th house, you may have some concerns about whether those types of initiatives will go the way that they have in the past, or that they won't really be satisfying, or you may have some doubts about your leadership ability or the priorities and motivations of other people. So I would try not to let that shake you too much, though it probably will come up as a major question for you to look at, and maybe relying on the fact that you're able to identify certain patterns now that maybe you haven't in the past is potentially very helpful. And if there are any weird serendipitous experiences that you encounter, if you run across some people that are of like mind and you want to spend more time with, I would definitely take that as a sign to connect. And ultimately, this is also speaking to a sense of security that you have within yourself and within your sense of connection with others, with this Mars in Cancer here. This can be very nurturing to others, and you may want to add to, say, the social resources around you or the social resources of those with whom you identify, those in the Cancerian in-group, so to say, nurturing that connection in order to create greater security and stability for you all collectively. And then having that social structure with the mutual reception between the moon and Mars here as well, having that social structure increase your sense of security in yourself. I would be pretty surprised if there's not opportunities to connect with others coming up for you in a pretty big way, Gemini rising, just because now not only is there going to be this solar eclipse in this house, but also Neptune and Saturn will be moving into this house pretty soon, and they'll be staying here for some years. So yeah, collaboration, group efforts, feeding into your sense of achieving what it is that you're meant to in the world and your security here. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Gemini rising. So for Cancer rising, this eclipse is taking place in your 10th house of your career and public reputation, your public life. And that is likely to bring up some urge of yours to become more independent, to take on a greater leadership role within your working environment. This is going to wind up playing into a transit that I have discussed a bit, and I'm going to continue to discuss for everyone, of Neptune moving into Aries and then Saturn moving into Aries. So this is likely a kind of kicking off point where you're starting to get the urge to move in that direction. There could be some moves that are made that impact you with regard to your career. So changes to your business or the company that you work for or your field that have some impact on your standing. I wouldn't be super concerned about this, but I should say that one thing we should keep in mind is that the sun is getting blotted out a little bit with that moon coming in front of it. So if you feel like you are getting overlooked for something, or that there's not enough recognition for something that you've done in your public life, then I would just recommend trying not to take it too personally. It's probably supposed to work out that way for some reason or another. And definitely don't be discouraged from like pursuing your own goals, your hopes and dreams in this area of your life because of a little blip like that. Like I said, Neptune and Saturn are going to be moving into this area, and they're going to be presenting opportunities and challenges of their own. But one thing that has me looking at this eclipse differently than a lot of other eclipses is just the fact that it's not tied in to everything else in the chart. So we could get little one-offs that look weird, and I think that a lot of the purpose behind that is going to be to get us to take a more independent perspective on something. So I'll give you an annoying example, but if you're working for a company where you feel like prospects are probably pretty good and it might be all right, the money might be pretty okay, it's not necessarily super fulfilling, but maybe you feel like if you were to step out of something that maybe it would be a bit frivolous. So then if you were to be overlooked in a way, if you were to experience a frustration or a challenge that might point to something deeper that you're perceiving, then maybe that's going to just kind of drive up in you the desire to be more independent. And that's probably then the purpose of something like that coming up. But ultimately, your role and how you're feeling about that role will be presenting itself to you in terms of the public sphere. And this could absolutely go in the other direction. It's neither, there's neither extremely negative or extremely positive omens with regard to this. So it could absolutely be something like a promotion. But again, if you're overlooked for something, it's not that it's really reflecting on you. It's that you're being called to look at this position that you're in a little bit differently than you have previously. So yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Cancer rising. So for Leo rising, we have this solar eclipse taking place in your ninth house of personal expansion and development, your worldview. And what's interesting about this alignment for you is that the ninth house is known as the joy of the sun. The sun does quite well here. It's, of course, high in the sky, but the sun is all about how it is that you expand and grow and shine and so on. And so the ninth house is very fitting for that. And the moon is moving in front of that sun there. So it's likely that you are being called to look at this area of your life a little bit differently. Are you feeling like there's a part of yourself that you would really love to grow, where you would love to be challenged to expand and stretch yourself, that you feel is falling a bit short right now? So maybe you haven't really been prioritizing studying the topics you want to, traveling in the way that you want to, experiencing life generally, just as a living being, as part of your life that you really want to. You're being called to focus in on this area and to pursue that further, especially if you have been feeling like you're developing in the way that is expected of you and not the way that you personally want to. With this taking place in Aries, it's all about what is it that you want, independent of anyone else, just out of your own interest. This isn't necessarily about professional development. It's not necessarily about what your family needs. It's not necessarily about what your friends like and trying to fit in with them. This is about you utilizing your life, utilizing your mind in the ways that you personally enjoy. So there could be an opportunity to travel, or there may be some sort of a course or a school or something that stands out to you that you are interested in pursuing. If that is the case, then this would encourage you to go in that direction and to get out of a comfort zone. But again, just trying to check in and making sure that those decisions that you're making are not totally impulsive or reactive against something, but rather that you're seeking to develop and challenge yourself to expand. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Leo rising. So for Virgo rising, this eclipse is taking place in your eighth house of other people's resources, of intimate relationships, of dependencies, interdependencies, codependencies, as well as your emotional resources. So there's likely something coming up here about your sense of security and other people and the, say, psychological dynamics of your relationships with others. So there may be something that comes up that calls that into question. You may be called upon to offer some emotional resources to others, or even material resources. But likely this is going to be making you feel like you don't want to be dependent upon others, because this is taking place in Aries. So checking on the give and take in your relationships would be very wise throughout this period of time. And especially if what you are presented with, maybe a bit out of the blue, is something of a red flag or an uncomfortable feeling about some control that you feel like someone else has over you, especially for emotional or financial reasons. And if that's the case, then this is calling for you to possibly step away from something like that, possibly dig into it and research it a bit. With this in the eighth house, this can be very helpful for you to understand matters like that, to kind of instinctively be able to pick up on power dynamics, but additionally be able to dig into those as necessary too. And the direction that this is going to be pushing you toward is a matter of transforming your connections with other people and your attachments, and to hopefully by the end of the lessons of this eclipse for you, feel less attached to any sort of matters that are not very healthy for you, and especially with regard to your psychological and emotional well-being. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Virgo rising, for this eclipse. So for Libra rising, we have this eclipse taking place in your seventh house of partnerships, both personal and professional. If you're married, it's probably speaking directly to a marriage. So there may be something that winds up coming up there. This could be a new relationship, someone that you wind up meeting that you then develop a close relationship with. This could be an opportunity to stand out in a very unique way in your professional relationships. Or it could be some event that comes up in an existing relationship that you have that causes you to look at it differently. Maybe you feel a bit overshadowed by someone else and their needs within a relationship, in which case this would be calling on you to address that either with them or on a personal level. The only thing that I would recommend is that we do have here Mercury retrograde in this house of yours, and then all of this in Aries. So if you can, I would recommend trying to avoid any blow-ups, any sort of arguments or getting really frustrated and acting upon that frustration, because you may wind up then having to come back to that and correct for that later. So I would just try not to be super impulsive, but your instincts when it comes to other people are likely to be very sharp during this time. And ultimately, what this is calling on you to do, especially since you naturally have Libra rising, it may feel often like in your relationships, you do give more than you take. So this would be encouraging you to be more assertive with your own personal needs with regard to other people in order to maintain the balance that Libra deeply favors, but can sometimes get a bit out of balance because of Libra inclining to give a lot. So always keeping in mind that fairness is that you give what you receive and not that you give and give and give and then receive little in return. So it's likely coming back to that kind of a lesson, which I'm sure has come up for you repeatedly in your life, but it's coming back to that to just basically remind yourself along those lines and then address any relationships or partnerships that you have where you feel like that is very much out of balance. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Libra rising. So for Scorpio rising, this eclipse is taking place in your sixth house of your routine, your health, the tasks and duties that you feel are placed upon you in your life. So your routine could totally get disrupted during this time. You are being asked to look at it and see if it's really working for you. There's probably something of it that is standing out that's just not feeling right. And it may be that you are needing to tweak some specific aspect of that routine of yours or the tasks that you feel are placed upon you. So, for instance, if you have a family and you feel like too many of the chores and errands and things like this are falling upon your shoulders and it's becoming unhealthy in a sense, it may even be stressing you out and putting pressure on your health then, if you're becoming exhausted or something like this. So you're being called to address that pretty boldly, to assert your own personal needs, and especially, again, if there's any sort of an impact on your health, to really advocate for yourself here. There may even be some task or skill that you're wanting to develop further that presents itself during this period of time, which you are meant to be pursuing and will likely feel an urge to pursue. So I would recommend not really overlooking that. And if you are trying to start a new health regimen, this would be quite helpful in achieving that long term. So I would aim to utilize this one toward that end. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio rising. So for Sagittarius rising, this eclipse is taking place in your fifth house of creativity and enjoyment, romantic relationships, adventure, your children. So if you are a creative type, this is likely to spur up some inspiration for you and push you to be more bold, more independent, more assertive, to really embrace your own unique inspiration and your own unique craft. to take chances and risks in that area. You may meet a romantic partner during this time, or if you are partnered up, then an urge to shake things up, if you feel like you're in a rut, to address that, to bring some more spontaneity and excitement and adventure into your relationship. You may feel as well like there's an exciting spark that is arising within your spirit around this time as well, which is, of course, extraordinarily lovely. The one thing that I would recommend is that, and I've been personally noticing a lot more sirens and stuff like that around me, so I can tell that this eclipse season is already getting people a little bit maybe overexcited. So I would try not to go overboard with fun things that can cause a little bit of trouble. So if you're going out at night or something like this, I would just try to be kind of mindful. You might get an urge to go a little bit overboard. But other than that, it should be really nice for you. The fifth house is probably my favorite, and you can absolutely utilize this in order to spark that kind of inspiration and that welling feeling of getting a spark, wanting to be spontaneous, wanting to be adventurous, wanting to be creative, wanting to express yourself and have more fun in your life. So this would not be a period of time to just do the usual things or to put off having fun because it seems like it's frivolous or something. You are actively being encouraged to pursue that area of your life more in this period of time. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Sagittarius rising. I personally really like it, so I hope that you have fun. So for Capricorn rising, this solar eclipse is taking place in your fourth house of your roots and your family, your home. And this can be roots in terms of a family lineage, but also just your personal core, your emotional foundations. So there could be some changes that are arising in this area of your life. You may be feeling an urge to move. You may be feeling a little bit stir crazy or a bit of a wanderlust coming up in you and wanting to shake things up, either by going away from where you usually reside or by changing things up within your home. This actually would be an interesting and pretty cool transit to utilize to do any sort of redecorating that you've had in mind. Also, if there's any issues that you feel you've been sweeping under the rug recently with regard to your family, this would be a good time to address it because you're likely to be able to express yourself quite boldly. But I would recommend, with Mercury in retrograde here in Aries, and then these two also in Aries, to try to avoid arguments in this area because you may then wind up having to readdress something later. One thing I would recommend being a little bit careful about is any sort of impulsive decisions about your home or even your family. Family members themselves may be appearing pretty impulsive. So I would just recommend taking a moment, taking some time to think things through before making the changes that are coming up for you during this time. And again, especially because of the fact that we have these planets which both went retrograde recently, right at that eclipse point, and moved from your fourth house into your third house, and then they'll be going direct again. So like I said, with regard to like arguments, impulsive decisions, otherwise you're likely to want to redo those. And there could even be delays. So for instance, if you suddenly decided to have contractors do something with your home, then it would probably take longer than you were expecting. And even redecorations and so forth, I would plan for it to take longer than you're thinking it will. So if you don't, like, one thing is when you start cleaning and you first basically need to make a mess of things to reorganize them, I would give yourself, plan for having a lot of the time of the making of the mess before everything gets reorganized. It's not that you shouldn't start the process, but I would just keep in mind it's going to take a little while. But ultimately, this is speaking to the independence of your own core and developing that. So any opportunities that you have to get more in touch with how you deeply feel rather than just going through the day to day that we typically do, where we're trying to meet the needs of that day, not to mention trying to meet the needs and expectations of other people. This is asking you to go a little bit deeper in yourself and make sure that you feel very independently stable in yourself during this period of time too. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Capricorn rising. So for Aquarius rising, this eclipse is taking place in your third house of your community, of communication, education, connecting with others, the people, places, and things around you, your neighborhood. So you may be seeing some interesting changes along those lines. You may be having some unexpected communications come through, like unexpected texts, which may inspire you to connect with people that maybe you haven't been in contact with for some time. You're also likely throughout this whole period of time, with transiting your third house, Mercury, and now this eclipse, to really boldly express yourself and just say what it is that you think and you mean very directly. The only thing I would caution with that is being very impulsive with your words and possibly saying something that you can't quite take back and that might make things a little bit awkward. So I would just try to be mindful about your words. And as long as they're not likely to cause more of a shakeup than you are desiring to have to deal with, then go for it. But if they are, that is an absolute possibility. With both retrogrades and with eclipses, things do tend to take longer to sort out than would otherwise be indicated. So if you say something that someone doesn't like, it may become a bit of a burden on you for quite a while. But if you are inspired to learn something new, to take a new course, to study something, to read a book, maybe you'll just be going through your life and a book will kind of present itself to you and you'll have an urge to pursue it. This eclipse is probably pushing you to connect with something that's said there. So I would definitely take that as a sign and pursue whatever it is that you are urged to learn more about. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Aquarius rising. So for Pisces rising, we have the solar eclipse taking place in your second house of finances, your security, your resources, your values, your self-worth. And with this taking place in Aries, you're likely to want to bring that more under your own control. So for instance, if you have a job, but you have been feeling like maybe there's a different potential income source, maybe like a side hustle or something along those lines that you've been thinking about pursuing, you're likely to feel a very strong urge to get that started around this time. If it's something that you have thought through for a little while, I would say definitely go for it. This can be a bit impulsive. So while you definitely know your situation a lot better than I do, when it comes to impulsive spending or impulsive decisions with regard to income sources, I would not really recommend those around this period of time, because with these retrogrades and then with the eclipse in your second house, it's likely to take longer to clean up any sort of mistakes that are made in this period of time. But as long as your decisions are sound, then pursuing something in this time, especially the planning stages of it, that's likely to in turn wind up paying off for you. You may also be looking at your finances differently, especially with regard to materialism and what's actually important to you. So questioning whether the things you direct your resources toward, do they improve your quality of life? Or is it just what you feel like you're supposed to be spending on? This would really encourage feeling very connected to what it is that you're spending on. And another way that this could definitely come through is if you're wanting greater financial independence, you may be finding that some saving plan or some cutbacks or things like that could offer you a greater sense of security and independence with your resources. And so you may feel urged to do that. And I would definitely recommend using this kind of an influence toward those ends. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Pisces rising. So thank you so much to everyone for being here. I hope that this video was helpful. If it was and you don't mind giving it a thumbs up, I greatly appreciate that. It helps the channel to grow by spreading the video around more. And if you're interested in content like this, where we take transits through the houses and discuss the impacts of astrology for us globally and collectively, do consider sticking around by subscribing. I would love to have you here. And thank you so much, especially to our members, Angel Nibluck, Patrick McKenney, Startlingly True, Deborah Keel-Levitt, Gary A., Stacy Bergener, Maria Serrell Hyro, Michelle Howell, JJ, Jody Z, C. Rezer, Anne Marie, Lynn Newman, Peace Out, Rachel Windholtz, Lisa S., and Aya. Thank you so much for your support. Much love to you. And I wish everyone a very happy eclipse season. And other than that, I will see you very soon. Be good. Bye.